Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for How to Localize Your Law Firm's Content Strategy in 2022 with our sponsor, CallRail. Our speakers today are Adam Gingery and Bernie Clark.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Adam Gingery. This is Bernie, founder of Majix. We're going to talk about four kind of buckets of content in this chat. One, what is local content and who is it for? Two, what does it actually do for you? Do you make money from this? Three, how to execute a strategy with your own editorial team or someone else's. And four, how you can track what's actually happening if you're investing in this kind of strategy. So with that, Bernie's gonna take it away and explain localized content.
Yeah, sure. And first, for those of you who have never heard of Majix, don't know who we are an agency with offices in Philadelphia and Denver that works with firms across the country, full range of kind of digital strategies. I would say the only thing we don't do is organic social. Everything else we do in-house. So very kind of down in the trenches in terms of content strategy, content fulfillment, the anatomy of what makes good content, which we'll get into a little bit. So just to kick it off, we start with kind of explaining what is quote unquote localized content. At its core, it's exactly what it sounds like, essentially. So it's content that's specifically tailored to target potential clients within a geo-fenced area, whether that's a major market specific to city names, town names, statewide, certainly multi-state with geographic silos, and we'll get down into that. At its core, stated another way, localized content equals relevancy, right? So good example might be, if you're producing content that is not geographic specific or specific to a geo, whatever that geo is, you may, and this is a common problem that we get all the time from potential partners that come inbound. They say, oh, I'm getting a lot of traffic into my blog or into these articles, or these 5 or 10 blog posts are doing great, but I get traffic from all over the country, and none of these folks can hire me. They're outside of my jurisdiction. Maybe you are referring those out, depending on the state. Maybe you're not. Maybe it's just taking up your time. Either way, ideally, you would rather be getting leads from potential clients that can hire you, right? And the way to do that is to bake relevancy into the strategy portion of the content. So how do you choose your kind of geographic boundary when localizing content? Like I said, obviously you can target city or town. Things that might make sense for a city or town or county might be if you are in a practice where that's kind of the natural break point, whether let's say it's criminal defense might be county specific. If you're in a major market, say Philadelphia, New York, the boroughs within New York, Chicago, that's kind of the boundary. The market itself is big enough that people use that when searching for representation for certain things. If you're in, real estate transactional work, obviously that would be kind of specific to a geo or a county. What happens if you aren't practicing in a geography that's large enough to support kind of an audience, right? Or a content strategy? Then you kind of have to get down into what we'll talk about in a second, kind of a ring strategy, where you just kind of keep expanding that geographic boundary that you're using to localize your content to where it makes sense, right? So if you're in a very rural area, perhaps, they term it, or folks that live there term it, Southwest XYZ. So then kind of the colloquialism of the geographic boundary might be SW XYZ geo, right? And then even larger, if you have a statewide practice or a multi-state practice, you can write content specific to the state and then silo that content in terms of URL structure. We can talk through that as well. So the cluster strategy, this is a strategy where the geo fence, let's say, that you're putting in place is kind of spread out from each other, right? So let's say you're in a state where you have offices in all of the major cities in that state, and each office in that geo is kind of specific to that geo. And a good example might be upstate New York, let's say. Buffalo, Erie County, one geo. Rochester, New York, fairly far away. People are not going to drive from Buffalo, New York to Rochester, New York. They may, but it's about an hour and 15 minutes away. Those two geos are distinct, right? So each one of those would be a cluster. And then within that cluster, there might be specific sub-geos, let's call them, that you would want to kind of focus on as well. This is really kind of understanding on the ground in the real world how people kind of differentiate geographies where you practice. The next strategy for geofencing or selecting geos is what we would call the ring strategy, where let's say you're in a market like Philadelphia, where Adam and I are sitting. Philadelphia is a major metropolitan area, but then it has ring suburbs, right? And to a certain extent, those ring suburbs are very densely populated and are kind of serve as their own markets, right? Particularly depending on the practice here, again, real estate, criminal defense, some of it's very localized. So that you would kind of start with what the main geo is that you can target, and then build out the ring where it makes sense, where you have offices, where you want to practice, where the audience is, where the eyeballs are, where the clients are. It's not always based on population. It could be anything. So who is localized content for? We kind of think about this in the sense of breaking it up into two groups. What I would loosely term as end of the funnel kind of audiences and top of the funnel to middle of the funnel type audiences, and I'll explain that. So top to mid of the funnel are people typically searching for pieces of content where they are in what I would call research phase, right? So, if it's a blog topic, and we'll get into kind of specific titles, typically that's what's called a long tail, kind of fully fleshed out blog topic. Usually takes the form of a question. It would be, something like, should I accept, the insurance, or this is a better example. Do you have to accept the insurance adjuster's first settlement offer in New York, let's say, right? That's a great kind of middle, top of the funnel type of research-based intent type of content piece. And then end of the funnel is kind of the point where we would say the reader or potential client has gone through all of these kind of research phases and decided that they think that they have an issue. I'm sure as many of you know, that's not always the case. They have decided that they're going to hire an attorney for representation for that issue. And then they are kind of creating the short list of firms or attorneys in their area that they are going to reach out to make a decision. So what that content might look like is typically shorter types of search terms, XYZ, geo, ABC practice area, lawyer, attorney, depending on, which is more widely used, or law firm. Does that make sense? Feel free to kind of let me know if anyone has any questions on that. Feel free to interrupt. So who should be writing localized content? Really, any firm, I would say. If you're interested in getting eyeballs or potential clients from the web, content is a foundational piece of that. Anyone would tell you that. I think that's pretty well established, kind of digital strategy these days. You'd be surprised how many firms are not kind of, for whatever reason, if they can't get it done, if they just don't have the resources, whatever, are not devoting any resources to kind of content strategy. But if not, those firms are definitely leaving eyeballs and leads on the table, because when done properly, it's fairly easy to do.
And I actually have a very quick thing to bring up with Bernie. This is kind of a side note here to this graphic of who's your content for. The research-based intent audience, the top to the middle of the funnel people, an offshoot of that is, this is basically free advertising for you, other than the effort of writing the content. I'm sure you've all considered doing display advertising, TV, who knows, YouTube ads. Those are all kind of broad, and you have to pay for every click, or, for TV per spot, but it's not very targeted. Well, you can get better targeting, but still kind of a widespread name recognition effect from content. Like if you're a business litigation attorney, for instance, and you write tangentially related topics about taxes, which you don't actually do, people who read your blogs in your state are still qualified to hire you when the need arises. And so you already are kind of building that name recognition early on, and you didn't have to pay for TV, for instance. Does that sound about right?
It would be anything where there's volume. So when Adam says kind of tangentially related, it could be, this is probably different for more full service type of firms that, can very easily kind of cross refer. But, we even have clients that build referral pipelines as part of their biz dev kind of real world network using content, right? So let's say you have somebody that refers you a ton of, plaintiffs' PI work, but they're a workers' comp attorney one town over, you can publish or have them, that referral source, write some content for your site, optimize it, publish it. You can name them as the author, and you'll get the eyeballs, you'll get those leads, and you can kind of refer work back and forth.
Right, so part two, we can get into what you really get out of this effort, because it does take some time, but they do generate leads. You will get real cases just from these pieces of content. They also fill important parts of your funnel, and they help your overall holistic SEO strategy. And we'll kind of jump into that stuff here. So firstly, you're going to be getting real leads from this without paying $400 or more per click. For any of you PI people, you're probably feeling the Google squeeze right about now. If you're into PPC advertising, we hear that a lot, and that's one of the benefits of a content strategy. Our first example, we pulled these URLs from a personal injury client. This is from Q1. Those are the total amount of organic web sessions, people from Google search and Bing and DuckDuckGo, which are 2% of the visitors, plus conversions, which are, we tracked these in Google Analytics. So people who click on a phone number, people who fill out a form, something like that. And, we tracked 43 conversions from these blog posts in Q1 for this client. He didn't pay for any of these clicks in PPC advertising or anything like that. And it's a tremendous amount of eyeballs. It's kind of that free advertising effect we were talking about. So the conversion rate is always going to be lower for these top of the funnel search queries. But the other benefit is people see these blogs, and later when they search for car accident lawyer X, they're still keeping this person top of mind. And they might even just do a brand search and call through Google My Business. We're going to talk about that more at the end in the attribution stage. But this is a PI example.
And I can jump in quickly. Really good kind of example of how the strategy, or a well-executed kind of localized content strategy, can generate leads for you. There's no silver bullet. It's not like one piece of content is going to generate, 100 leads for you each month. It's more what I would call kind of a snowball effect. And this is kind of goes back to what we'll talk about with the kind of holistic approach to it, in the sense that, let's say you publish one piece of content that generates, 5 leads over the course of an entire year, right? That's one piece of content. What did it get you to kind of produce that content? Certainly less than if you were paying for all of the clicks necessary to kind of trickle down to those 5 leads, right, over the course of a year. And in terms of like the snowball effect, as you publish content, you shouldn't just be publishing content and then sitting, publishing no content for a period of time. A healthy kind of balanced content approach, you kind of just generate, if you're producing one blog post that has 5 leads over the course of a year, you should be publishing 10 of those a month, 20 of those a month. They don't go anywhere month 2, month 3. They kind of continue to build off of each other, right? So it's really, this is a pretty typical kind of spread, I would say, in terms of traffic and leads generation and conversion rate.
There's a question for you guys.
Yeah.
The question is I understand that publishing localized content helps with stickiness, but does it also help with improving your firm's position or rank, either in the index with sites like Google and Yelp?
We're going to get to that here in about 15 seconds.
Okay, great.
Yep, that's a good question. And that's a big part of why you would want to do this for sure. Just for all of your benefit, we do have a couple more examples here, which you're also going to get this in a follow-up email, I believe. So you can kind of look at it more closely. But again, these are just 10 of hundreds of blog posts that these particular websites had. And here's how much traffic and how many leads they're getting. This was just Q1. So kind of motivation to jump in and show that it really works and it's making money for real law firms. This is the last point before we get to that question about, does it help your site rank better on Google? Bernie touched on this in the first section, but this content will all fill an important part of your marketing funnel. Top of the funnel, for instance, what do you do after a car accident in California? Get people when they're Googling at an accident site, and then you can just write posts that answer questions for each step along the way. And then who's left at the end when they're ready to hire a lawyer? Well, it's probably you, and unfortunately, law firms can't really do retargeting the way a lot of businesses do. So you have to rely on this organic visibility, but it's an important thing to do. It's
also not uncommon for our clients who are in what I would call kind of a more mature content strategy, where they have many of these kind of funnel pipelines filled in, with even subpoints between some of these major points, where a potential client will see them several times and make that comment, or see their content several times and make that comment when contacting them, right? Saying, you guys were just everywhere. I was Googling stuff, researching stuff, and came back 3 times. If it takes them 2 or 3 times to kind of make a decision, you're there at every point in the way, getting a drip point. That's also a cool CallRail tie-in, strangely enough. That's a little bit off script, but we have CallRail, if you have the pool set up, which we'll talk about at the end in the attribution part as well. But if you use their dynamic call tracking, it tracks touch points along the way. And this is an outlier situation that I'm about to mention, but we literally tracked through that. We saw someone visit a client's website, at one point. 3 months later, they visited again, different page. And then maybe 5 months later or so, they actually called and became a client of the law firm we were partnering with. And we were able to see that actually happen, that funnel unfold before our eyes. And that was very interesting. Because we were able to track it in CallRail, so that's the tie-in, but it really does happen. That was a litigation matter. I think it was transactional. So, obviously the window of time would be shortened for what I would call kind of consumer-based practice areas. But, for corporate or commercial lit, big dollar type of litigation stuff, there might take much longer to make a decision or do more research that might be baked into the timeline. So now we're getting into more of your holistic SEO strategy, and does this help you be more visible on Google? The answer is yes.
And that's because Google likes websites that demonstrate a significant amount of authority and relevance. And that has to do, that's topically, your practice area, how much content do you have about your practice area? And then also location specific content. Is Google understanding that you serve Chicago? And do you mention local laws? Do you answer specific questions about Chicago and Illinois? This graphic kind of gives you an example, Minneapolis specific. You're going to have your top level practice pages. Those are ironically at the bottom of the funnel. They're at the top of this hierarchy, but you would want to rank on Google for Minneapolis car accident lawyer, for instance. Well, if you want to do that, that's a huge conversation. But one of the things you need to do is have this localized content strategy, because you can organize your website's structure so that all of these posts and pages about answering specific questions for potential car accident clients, you can organize those underneath that core practice page, the one that you want to rank on Google for Minneapolis car accident lawyer. Link from those specific posts up to that main one, the hub page, if you will. And over time, Google will reward your rankings for that. You'll rank better on Google, you'll get more traffic, you'll get more leads, all because you're supporting it with a strong foundation of relevancy, both topically and geographically.
And one of the reasons for that is that Google tracks signals in the form of click-through rates for search engine results, right? So let's say that you have kind of all of these specific topics covered, and they're ranking well and having good click-through signals, meaning people are clicking on that result when they search for this topic, and then staying on your page long enough, not backing out, choosing another result from the same search, which Google also tracks as a signal. Google rewards your site for that happening. Now you stack those signals up, again and again and again for many different pieces of content under kind of the same content topical umbrella, right? And that's how you really can rank widely for a lot of these terms and have each of these pieces of content kind of help each other rank, kind of boost the site overall. Good example in practice of it is, you might have, and to stay with the personal injury example, you might have, and we see this, we have clients that are in this exact situation, ranking very, very well, across the board, top in their geo for personal injury and car accident stuff, right? Terms, getting leads, they say, okay, Bernie, Adam, I want to kind of pivot the content strategy, focus heavily on med mal or birth injury, right? Now, Google, depending on the geo, because this is very geo specific, in many geos, Google will not often reward you as a site as much with kind of what I would call out of the gate visibility for medical malpractice topics that they would if you just continued to publish, more personal injury or car accident topics, right? They view, Google, meaning they, the big they, Google, they view kind of med mal topics as their own relevancy topic. So that means that you have to kind of start out from scratch, boosting up your visibility with all of the supporting content that specifically answers the intent of what people are searching for and build up those signals, if that makes sense.
Another fascinating real world example regarding relevancy and ranking well on Google is we still work with a firm that decided they wanted to equally focus on criminal defense and personal injury. And the strategy ended up being to take this very established website with all of this content on the same URL and split it in half and have two different websites entirely, one for personal injury and one for criminal defense. And that's kind of a risky thing to do, right? Because the original URL had all of the backlinks, had all the PR, et cetera, et cetera. Well, they both ended up ranking better on Google in a relatively quick period of time likely because the one site then had all of this purely personal injury relevance and the other one was purely criminal defense. And that kind of showed us Google cares more every year, honestly, about can they tell what exactly your site is about, and is it valuable to people who are Googling these things on the search engine? Is there anything you wanted to chip in?
Yeah, I would say, and that evolves over time, and that's kind of what Adam meant by yearly. You know, if you had asked us 2 years ago whether or not a firm needed to split off kind of practice areas that are so different as criminal defense and plaintiff's personal injury, we would have said no, because it's going to take you double the work to rank 2 sites and then, you know, screw up your local citations, you know, confuse users, you know, blah, blah. But Google is becoming so good over time, and it evolves quickly these days at kind of evaluating whether or not there's friction in terms of what's interesting to the audience that it views the content on your website as being useful for, right? So if you had PI and criminal defense, you might be ranking pretty well for both of those, and this client was ranking pretty well. And we had everything separated so that, you know, in the real world, you know, somebody entering the site on a criminal defense page wasn't presented with personal injury information, you know, no personal injury testimonials, no personal injury results. So we kind of tried to silo the conversion elements. But, you know, to Google, they're not kind of evaluating sites the same way, even though they can identify the silos, the URL structure that you have. They might say, well, why am I rewarding this site with personal injury kind of visibility, which is very competitive, as well as criminal defense visibility, which is also very competitive, when you have this other site that's over here producing content that's just as good, doing everything else the same, and is only about criminal defense, right? Like, that's who you're competing with for eyeballs. So it's just something kind of evolving, and I'm sure will continue to evolve. And again, it's also geo-specific. So that was specific to this one geo. If you're in a very rural geo where all of your competitors have, you know, more kind of full service, you know, overarching consumer-based practice areas or something like that, or multiple kind of practice areas under that umbrella, you know, you don't need to do that. It wouldn't make sense. Does anyone have any questions about that? We could give a whole presentation just on that. So we kind of touched on it quickly. It's a great question.
There is actually a question for you guys. Let's say that we come up with the top 20 Q&A, which are typically asked from clients. Should all 20 be published at the same time, or start off with 5 and publish the rest on a regular schedule over the next 30, 60, 90 days?
So there's 2 pieces to that. First, I would strongly suggest that you not publish Q&A content or like FAQ content on one full page that's just, you know, FAQ, and a lot of firms do this. FAQs or Q&As where they have one kind of very long page that just lists, you know, a topic and then has 3 paragraphs under it. Each of these topics is so competitive these days, and other firms are devoting, you know, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 words to the individual topics, that you really kind of want to break that out into each FAQ or Q&A kind of topic into its own individual blog post, right? It's almost like FAQ pages and Q&A pages, how they've traditionally existed, are what a content strategy is, right? Those are the topics that build into what we're talking about in terms of content strategy. Second, in terms of frequency, if you had to choose between one or the other and there was no other content coming, right? What I would do is I would separate the types of content out into the 2 pieces as we kind of outline them. First, if it's a practice area page or an end of the funnel page, publish all of those at once. You know, you can publish as many of those as you want. You know, if you're launching a new site or a new practice area or entering a new geo, for instance, absorbing another firm. It happens every day all over the internet. People are publishing, 20 practice area pages all at once. We've never seen a negative impact from doing that. On the kind of blog post side, as I would say, more long tail kind of top of the funnel, research-based intent stuff, you would want to schedule that out if there was no more content coming. What that schedule is, probably depends on how big that bucket of content is. Obviously, you would want to publish that content as quickly as possible so you have more time to get eyeballs on it. But if you're publishing twice a week, 3 times a week, that's pretty good. That's a pretty good schedule. It has freshness to it. And I'll be honest, this is a little bit of a tangent. Even going back and refreshing old content kind of also fulfills that freshness. And that kind of plays into relevancy. If you have something that was, I don't know, about kind of tax rules for 2021, right? As soon as the tax year clicks over and you can publish or update that old piece of content renewed for 2022's tax rules, you should do that, right? You'll get the same kind of refreshing of relevancy.
So perhaps to clarify, Bernie, you would say it's more important to communicate freshness, ongoing website content updates, and basically training the Google bot to revisit your site every day to crawl your site than it is to blast 30 posts out day one and then forget about it.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and Adam brought up another point that is important. You can actually train Google to come back and look for new content on your site. And we see this often with new clients, whereas if they haven't published content in a very long time, even if you submit their site to Google in Search Console, they may come back once and then not come back for another week or two, right? Whereas you typically want Google's crawlers coming back every day to at least crawl your sitemap and kind of give you credit for that content you're putting out.
So now we're to the execution part. How do you actually do this? Perhaps one of the most important things is choosing your topics, and we'll talk about that quickly here. You can just use common sense right at the beginning, believe it or not. You can use tools, we have all the software that we use sometimes. We've found that we're better at researching topics when we just use what we know. You as, a partner or as an attorney or a marketing director, you know what you need to know already to get started. Just take a common question, plug it into Google, and you can use this awesome feature called People Also Ask. This is free stuff that Google is giving us. These are all going to be individual blog posts for a law firm out there. And then if you click on one of those results, which we're not doing in real time because it's a screenshot, but it expands, and you may have done this already, and gives you, 5 more. It's like an accordion feature. And this is an awesome way to get started choosing topics. You can also, use forums, believe it or not. Go on Reddit, go on Quora. People ask legal questions all the time. And every once in a while, you'll find a diamond in the rough. And that's important because of how, web inflation. There are millions of pages being published every day. Most of these kinds of topics are covered already, and you have to write about them too. But it's great when you can find something that's new, because it's amazing how many new searches there are on Google every day. So if you see something in a Reddit forum, someone has a new question that you haven't seen before about a wrongful death case, well, that would be a great blog topic. And even if it gets 3 hits a month, one of those could turn into a huge case. So that's one way to kind of think about this strategy. Did you have anything you wanted to add to finding topics?
Yeah, and actually, and we're kind of giving you ways to do this without subscribing to expensive software or, setting up kind of exports and pivot tables and Search Console, which certainly agencies like ours can do for you and are part of kind of how we generate kind of topics for content strategy. But right out of the gate, if you're starting fresh without any of that, this is a great tool. I will say this from my in-house days, remembering how difficult it used to be sometimes to get content from my attorneys. Let's say that one of your partners or one of your attorneys is really motivated to write a piece of content on a topic that they just have in their head, right? This happens. They give you the topic and you say in your head, okay, I don't know how widespread that audience might be that's interested in that topic, or I don't know if that's necessarily relevant to folks who could actually hire us, right? What you can do is you can take that topic, pop it into this, and then kind of dissect it further for the people also asked topics beneath that, right? And then come back to that attorney and say, under that kind of umbrella topic that you were talking about, maybe it's too broad, maybe it's not, could be a lot of different things. Here's some more kind of specific stuff that makes it easier for you to write the piece, right? Just answer this question, done. So that's a good way to kind of get content produced as well.
And just to be clear, this isn't like a tool. Just type a question into Google and you will see the people also ask section. I'm sure you probably use it all the time. For actually doing this, we have an example from our own website. Just to be clear, this particular blog is not locally focused, obviously, but the anatomy is there, and that's what we're going to talk about. First, take a topic and dig deep. Like, this is a very specific question. Should you be using call ads, call only ads to generate leads on Google? That's one very specific question that we squeezed 800 or so words out of. Two, these subheadings should be actual questions that people are asking, if possible. Very carefully organize these blog posts logically. Does it ask a question that someone might actually ask? And you have to answer this very specifically right afterwards. So the cadence is, you have a subheading, what is the call ad in Google Ads? And then in that first section, a declarative sentence answering the question. The reason you want to do this is because you want to compete for featured snippets on Google. Gotta slide this over. If you actually do that, you can compete for these because Google picks kind of that first paragraph of your answer to feature. This is a client that we've worked with for a long time. This is a localized example. If you Google that, you'll see the featured snippet. And this is because it directly sets up the question and directly answers it in the blog post. This is what you want all of your blog posts to look like structurally.
And now think about this, right? So you can see right here, kind of right underneath the toolbar here, they jumped to the head of the pack for 12,400,000 search results for that topic, right? Just because they did what Adam is describing. The value of being featured here, right, is huge, right? And it's really because they were just very, very clear in the first opening paragraph about kind of what the answer to that query was. So you're essentially answering what question the searcher is looking for very clearly right out of the gate and in a unique way, right? In a way that no other piece of content does, word for word, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Avoid fluff. You can't noodle around before you answer the question, or you probably won't get the featured snippet. Another important thing that you would want to start doing right away when you publish these blogs is include internal links in your blog posts. Each page you publish, or each of these type of localized blog posts that answer specific questions, should be linking out from that blog to other relevant blogs on your website and to your practice area pages with anchor text. What that means is, in a call to action in that blog post, say, if you need a disability lawyer in New York, the disability lawyer in New York text, include in that a link to the page that you want to rank on Google for that phrase. That'll help it rank over time. We talked about that back in the second section of the talk, specifically to answer that question about, does this help you rank better on Google? The answer is yes, and that's one reason how. Moving on, how do we track the results of this? This is maybe the easiest part, but it's really important. Firstly, obviously, always put Google Analytics on your website. We recommend using Google Tag Manager. Your marketing director will know what that is. But that way you can go into Google Analytics, you can use landing page reports and very specifically see which pages are getting organic search traffic. And furthermore, you can see which pages are generating leads. Also, another CallRail tie-in here, you would want to use a keyword tracking pool, because then in CallRail's dashboard, you can see what landing pages are driving calls. And then secondly, you can use the API to connect CallRail to Google Analytics and even your Google Ads account if you're running PPC ads. So it will port those real phone calls that you tracked in CallRail back to the source. So in Google Analytics, for instance, you can just open up your Google Analytics reports, see landing pages, which posts are driving local traffic, and then see physically how many phone calls you got last month from that. Now, these steps 4 and 5 here somewhat refutes that, in that you can't purely track how many phone calls can we track from a specific blog post, because there's a big halo effect from being this visible online. So in Google Search Console, you can see literal queries people are using to reach your site. You might, when you start publishing content over time, you might see an increase in branded searches, like maybe no one's ever Googled your name before at volume. And then after doing this for a year, and maybe you're getting 1,000 hits a month, you start seeing, attorney Tom Brown increasing in search query volume in Google Search Console. Well, unless you got featured on the news or something, that's probably part of the halo effect that I was talking about with your content. And the landing page report in Google Analytics would not necessarily reflect that, because you'd be wondering, oh, why are people landing on my bio page? If you start seeing a lot of homepage traffic, that's probably because of an increase in branded searches.
If properly optimized.
Yeah.
if your homepage is what's properly optimized for your brand name.
And yet again, another whole talk that should probably be had at some point. But yeah, if your homepage is optimized for your brand name, that's what would be showing up if someone searches for your brand name, which they may have encountered from your various blog posts over time. And then kind of the last bucket off the top of my head is Google My Business, which, as we all know, more and more searches every year are coming from near me type things, but then also branded searches. If someone searches for the X law firm, New York, they probably want to see your reviews. They want to see where you are on the map, stuff like that. And they may have seen your name because they read one of your blog posts that they searched when they were at the top of the funnel. Now they're at the bottom of the funnel. They search for your brand name. They looked at the reviews. And if they click through your website from Google My Business, that landing page, the blog post, is not going to get credit for that, which is okay. It's just how it works. Or they're going to call you directly from the Google My Business listing, which is the more likely scenario. And then you totally lose the scent attribution wise. But if you start seeing an incremental increase in calls from GMB, Google My Business, after you've been publishing content for a year, of course it's related. And that's kind of a very normal thing that we see.
Yeah, that's the halo effect. Another big thing that comes out of tracking this properly is what I would call kind of content extrapolation, right? So once you have kind of all of this tracking set up and you're measuring things, accurately, with some kind of frequency and time, let's say that you recognize that you publish a piece of content that really seems to be resonating with kind of your target audience, right? It may not be something that you thought, there's always surprises that would, resonate very well. And I can give you an example, real world. Criminal defense client, we published a piece of content. It was a blog post. How do you fill the commissary for inmates at XYZ? This was an appellate practice, right? That started generating, and that's kind of a one-off. It was a client that was down the mature kind of arm of a content strategy. It's not something we published right out of the gate. Had a high enough volume and things, but it was more of a warm than a hot type of bucket, you would think. Tracking the leads, he starts getting tons of leads from that post, right? So what we then do is kind of extrapolate that out, right? How do you call XYZ Holding Center? How do you check if inmate is at, ABC Holding Center? Things like that. Doing great for that client. Really generates a decent amount of leads.
My last point that kind of builds off that is, if you set up Google Search Console, as you have been publishing pages over time, you can see those search query reports in Google Search Console, which we talked about already. But if you filter for the highest impression searches first, if you see a phrase showing up in your Google Search Console account that got, say, 10,000 impressions in the last 6 months, but 5 clicks, an extremely low click-through rate, that means your website is visible for that, but it's not relevant. So take that query that you see and write a page for it.
Make it more relevant.
Yeah, a very specific blog post to answer that question that's showing up in your Google Search Console account. And that's something that you could do forever. Every month, revisit it, or every 6 months or whatever, and then you're going to keep getting more traffic. All right, so that's kind of the end of the structured talk here. We do have an offer in that we're happy to talk to anyone for 15 minutes about the potential of a content strategy, what you could do, what your opportunity is. We'd love to help. CallRail, I'm sure Sean would like to jump in and say something about that. And we also have a poll question or two that we would be thrilled if you would answer it. And we really appreciate you listening. And this has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, we could talk about this for hours. There's really a lot. We got down into the weeds on a few things, but this could be a long presentation.
Hey guys, I really appreciate it. Thank you guys for taking the time today. And I don't want to divert the combo too much, but as they mentioned, if you were interested in trying CallRail, we're also offering a 14-day free trial. You can reach us at callrail.com, sign up right on the homepage there. If you're interested in learning more about your marketing activities, like your content strategy, and what's actually helping to drive leads and help you get more cases. We'll show you that path, that customer journey, or your client journey that these leads are taking, what channels are performing best for your firm. But yeah, let me turn it back over to you guys for some of the questions that we have.
And we can vouch for CallRail. CallRail, when set up properly, will revolutionize a firm's intake process. It's really great.
Just one question for you guys, and then we will have to wrap up. The question is, should the blog posts on third-party sites provide a partial or complete answer? In other words, should we publish a teaser and ask them to visit the site for additional information?
That would depend on the value of the third-party site, perhaps. If it's going to get a lot of eyeballs, like if it's a really good third-party site that you're proud to be published on, my impression is you would really want to go for it, because people will still Google your brand name. Let's say they see your firm publish in Forbes or whatever, Business Insider. Write the best thing you can, and it's going to get a ton of traffic, and people are going to Google you or go visit your website afterwards.
And there's also some speculation, not only in terms of the backlink that third-party site would give to your site. Note on that, try and make the backlink anchor text and URL that you're pointing to from that third-party piece relevant to the subject of that third-party piece. You'll get a lot more from that, kind of in terms of SEO value. There's also speculation that Google is now becoming better at tracking what I would call kind of unlinked mentions, in the sense that, even if, a really kind of high authority or, nationally recognized in the real world, publication, mentions you, or you publish something on their site, even if they don't link back to you, Google still gives you some credit for that.
All right, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you to Bernie and to Adam, Sean, and CallRail for putting this together. And thank you everyone for joining us. Bye everyone.
Thanks for the time.